Friday, we made a pretty big deal about Danika Patrick. We were very proud of her. She won the pole, or took the pole, so she could start first in NASCAR. And by the end of the first lap, she was already falling back to third place. I actually watched the first, 5 laps. And then I was like, I don't know how people watch NASCAR. I'm sorry, I really don't. I was all excited. I'm like, go Danica Patrick, very proud of you, watching history right here. And she didn't even have the lead after 1 lap. And they start in rows. So I couldn't really understand how that happened. But she was able to lose the lead in less than the first lap.
Stayed in the top 10 most of the day, though. Was actually third on the final lap before she fell back to 8th right at the finish. But she was third running behind Biffle and Jimmie Johnson when Mark Martin and Dale Earnhardt made a move right on about halfway through the last lap, try and overtake Johnson. Couldn't get to him, but Earnhardt did take second. Danica, because of that, ended up losing some positions, dropping back. Was a good race, 6 cautions, I believe. One wreck actually took out a couple of the favorites, like Harvick and Tony Stewart. But good race. I enjoyed it. I watched probably the last, 50 laps or so straight. Just didn't turn the channel at all. I was intrigued by it. I like watching, especially late in the race, how teams pit. Where, some teams are just taking fuel, some were taking 2 tires. Nobody really took 4 tires at the end. It's interesting to see the strategies of how it all goes on, in my opinion. And I know maybe it's not as exciting for you to watch, but I don't know. It gets crazy at the end of races. And, you saw a lot of bumping, a lot of touching, a lot of, just a lot of craziness go on. Because you see Danica actually rolled up and tapped Biffle, and then, because of that, Earnhardt actually dropped back a little bit because he didn't know if something was going to happen there, so he didn't want to get involved in a wreck. And there's a lot of play involved in that. And Jimmie Johnson, really it was the high part of the track that allowed him to win. It had just a better groove in it. You saw that they were running in lanes pretty much. Well, the high side was running just a little bit faster, and before actually the last caution came out, Jimmie Johnson was actually on the bottom part of the track, and he actually couldn't get past Keselowski, who kept trying to maintain the lead, and it wasn't until the final caution where Jimmie was actually able to move up to that top part of the track and really get in that groove. Really, I enjoyed the race. I applaud Danica for even finishing 8th. She, like I said, she was in the top 10
almost the whole time, man.
Almost the entire race.
See, maybe that's where I screwed myself. By watching those first couple laps when guys are just trying to get the feel for the course.
Well, yeah, you get the feel for the track. You gotta,
it's just like a basketball game. Let's be serious. The first 10 minutes of a game, the first 3 quarters of a basketball game are nothing in comparison to watching the 4th quarter of a basketball game. So, maybe that's where I screwed myself. And if it is, then the next race I'll have to try the opposite and watch at the end instead of watch the beginning, see what happens. Sad part of the weekend. Well, actually, let's say on the positive part, and then we'll make sure to mention what happened with the accident on Saturday. Jimmie Johnson obviously winning, first time since 2006, second time total that he's won the Daytona 500. When he won it in 2006, it was actually what sparked his 5 straight Sprint Cup Series championships. Hard to believe that will ever be done, but perhaps this is a sign that this could be Jimmie Johnson's year again. Who knows? He is arguably the biggest name in the sport when it comes down to what he's done on the track. I know you got Dale Earnhardt does a lot of advertising and promotional work for other companies and stuff, but I know Jimmie Johnson because of winning. And let's be serious. You want to get your name known? Winning, best way to do it. Well, that's how I know Jimmie Johnson. And I will say it seems that this man and his team, his crew, the car, the whole spectrum of what they have going on is very, very good. And these guys seem to really know what they're doing. But I will say Jimmie Johnson also became only the 10th driver ever to win the Daytona 500 multiple times, which is actually really impressive if you think about it, because it's not like Daytona 500 is like something that's only like 10 years old. All right, like this is something that they've been doing this for a long time.
This is actually the third time in the last 4 years as well that Earnhardt Jr.'s finished in second in the Daytona 500. Just hasn't been able.
That's got to eat him, man. That's got to eat.
And you think so, but I mean, when Jimmie Johnson did win, and him and Jimmie Johnson are teammates as well as Danika is actually a teammate of theirs as well, I believe. They actually had a good race, and believe it or not, there were a lot of smaller drivers, and by that I mean that they didn't have like huge sponsors. It wasn't like Home Depot or any of the big names. So some of the smaller racing teams actually were around the top 10, around the top 15. And that was really good to see because it shows that the sport's growing. A big problem out of yesterday, too, was the blown engines, actually. I think Toyota actually had 2 blown engines from 2 of their guys. Something they may want to look at and work on because they were actually running pretty well when they were out on the track. So, I don't know. I like the race. I'm a big fan, and it's different than any other sport, and they kick off their year with the Super Bowl as opposed to finishing it with the Super Bowl like all other sports do.
Yeah.
Like, the World Series or the Stanley Cup or the NBA finals. This is their mecca. Everybody wants to win the Daytona. And another interesting stat I heard, Jimmie Johnson, he actually won on his it was his 400th race. And I forget the list of names, but there is a huge list of names of legendary drivers like Richard Petty, Parsons, I believe, is another one. I know Dale Earnhardt Sr. all won on their 400th race as well. So, just another little historical fact to throw out there.
Yeah, but that's some cool stuff to know. I mean, seriously. I will say, what I want to ask you before we move on from this is, if you were Danica Patrick, how do you feel about yesterday? If you're her, how do you feel about yesterday?
You probably feel good, but like I said, if you watch the end of the race, she was sitting in third at the end, and it was really who was going to make the move. And they were all in a line pretty much, and you had Jimmie Johnson, Biffle, Danica, Earnhardt Jr., and then Mark Martin. And because of the way they were stacked up, obviously the only way to get ahead of Jimmie Johnson is to go around him, and it was who was going to make that first move. And I was really hoping that it would have been Danica with maybe Earnhardt Jr. behind her, pushing her. She seemed hesitant to make that move, in my opinion, from what I saw. It looked like she wasn't sure about making, and then by the time she probably even thought about making it, it was too late because Earnhardt had already done it. She waited too long.
Okay.
She shouldn't have waited that long.
So are you saying to yourself, if you're Danica Patrick, that you had a chance but you were hesitant and blew it?
No, I think you just look at it as you had an opportunity, but you're proud of yourself because you were the pole sitter. You did finish 8th. You still earned a good amount of points for your team. You still got a nice payday out of it. I don't think she holds her head down over this, but I think if she goes back and really looks at it or thinks about it, she probably thinks, I should have made a move when she didn't.
Okay. See, because I know one of the things I heard her, or what she's quoted as saying, is that she'll definitely be reliving the race for a long time. In other words, she knows that she could have did something more. Like, that's how I take that quote. Like, she knows she could have did something more to possibly win this race.
Well, she's always going to remember it for being the pole sitter. She's always going to remember it as her So far, I think it's her best finish in the Daytona 500.
I don't know off the top of my head.
I think this is
Daytona
only-
500. Yeah, I think this is no doubt her best finish. But
She really, like I said, she can't hold her head down too much. But if she goes back and looks at the end of that race, she probably thinks I could have done something
I could have
different.
did something different. And that, you know what? That's one of the hardest things about sports, man. Especially in a sport like this, where if she does that and things go wrong, she drops out of the top 10. But if she doesn't, things go right, she possibly wins the race. It's a risk-reward situation. She took the safe road, took a top 10 finish, which, let's be serious here, in the Sprint Cup Series, it's not about winning the races. It's about making sure you get enough points to get into that final set of drivers in the Sprint Cup Series so you can go win the actual Sprint Cup. That is what these guys, when their season is all said and done, that's really what these guys are racing for, is the Sprint Cup Championship. They want that final trophy. So a top 10 finish is not a bad thing. And that's where she's got to remind herself, like, hey, I finished in the top 10. If I can consistently be in this area, even if it is just between 8 and 10, when the year's done, I get into that last set of drivers, and then anything can happen. Just like when we talk about just get to the playoffs. You can be 8 and 8, you could be 9 and 7, you could be 14 and 2 in the NFL playoffs. It makes no difference. Once you're there, that's when things matter. So for her, yes, I could see not being very happy with how you might have handled the end or thinking you could have done more, but you also could have done more to hurt yourself. Bottom line is you got a top 10 finish, and in the long run, that can help you when it comes down to getting to the Sprint Cup Series and having an opportunity to actually win the Sprint Cup itself. Because that's what these guys are really playing for when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I don't think she's actually probably going to be there at the end of the year. She might be close, but and again, I root for her to be there because I think it'll only help the popularity of the sport grow.
Oh, it would help. I think it'd help a lot.
I do pull for her, but I have a hard time believing that she'll be there at the end of the year.